because we don't know where they came from. We don't know where their home base is. We don't know what raw materials they need to function. We don't know if they eat, drink, or sleep. We've got no data on this. How do you defend yourself against an entity that's coming at you from God knows where, God knows when, with God knows what resources?
Hi, and welcome to another episode. Today we'll be discussing the popular topic that's going around UFO circles in the community, the proposed 2027 year and date where supposedly there will be some sort of event, catastrophic or not, or some sort of forced disclosure, some sort of acknowledgement significant enough to cause a bit of controversy and a lot of discussion in the UFO community. And that's what we'll be talking about on this episode. I don't know if many of you have heard of this, but I originally heard of this date by Chris Bledsoe years ago. I think I might have heard him say this on a MUFON podcast, the Open Radio podcast, I think. And he mentioned these dates, 2027. And so that's where I remember it from Chris Bledsoe a few years ago. But now, for example, we have Ross Coilthart pretty explicitly saying that something is going to happen.
There's certainly something going to happen in 2027, and I don't know what it is.
Okay.
I've also heard 2034, and I've also heard other dates, much later. But depends who you talk to. Some people say it's a pole reversal. Some people say it's an asteroid hitting the planet. Some people say it's AI reaching quantum, and then all of a sudden we lose the capacity to have control of our own computer systems. I have no idea. What I am aware of is that everybody's telling me we're on borrowed time. And I cannot begin to emphasize how serious a look I get when I say to people who are confiding in me, what's the timescale on this? And they're urging me to be urgent. They're saying to me, people need the right to know this. They have a right to know this. And I'm going, well, what are we talking about? And I feel like shaking these people and saying, for God's sake, just bloody tell me. And they are all constrained by their national security oaths. They want the public to know this.
He has a lot of credible insider knowledge that supports his claim. He is not sure whether it's something positive or negative, but he seems quite sure that that year will be a year pretty significant for the whole world. Along with Ross Coilthart, you have Peter Levenda recently in Engaging the Phenomenon podcast, along James and Jim Samivan. He was asked point blankly about possible alien invasion.
Have this concept of war, right? But potentially, in the book you guys mentioned, you have to look at it from the perspective of an alien invasion, right? And if that were true, we're basically sitting on our hands, no? Or as a civilization, we're just sitting on our hands and not doing anything about anything.
Well, Peter, that's another tough question for you.
Thanks a lot, Jim. You set me up with this whole thing. Now I got to.
I know we did beforehand, right?
Thanks a lot. If we think in terms of an alien invasion, which I think we have to look at the worst case scenario, right? I mean, and that's what the government has to do, right? The military has to do this. Military is always thinking of worst case scenario. They war game this stuff, right? But how do you war game something with the phenomenon, right? When we have no freaking clue what we're talking about in terms of capabilities or intention or even identity, right? So, if you see movies, and we mentioned this in war, movies like Independence Day, right? Independence Day, oh, it was great. We defeated the aliens. We beat them at their own game. Seriously? Really? They're not coming back, maybe?
His book War deals with this in this case. But in the book, I mean, I've read the book. I don't know if you guys have read War. It's quite good. I mean, it's not my favorite, but my favorite of his is Man. But on this episode with James, he did discuss how, for example, like the U.S. government and defense agencies or corporations look at this issue of the UAP and UFO through the lens of defense and what would be the worst outcome possible. And of course, they see it from, how can we protect ourselves from this? Can we even do that? And his book outlines a bit, goes along these details. And then you have even Lou Elizondo, his book Imminent. I mean, just the title itself, Imminent, something is going to happen. He's made several references to that the insiders know that there is a timeline and that time in itself is running out, and whether the government get their act together or not, something will happen. In his book, I mean, from my perspective, he does lean towards the idea that there will be some sort of invasion or takeover or colonization, because if he interprets the UAP phenomenon through just defense, it does seem like what the UAP and the NHI are doing is recon and surveying the land, the possible testing and probing human beings for their potential. It could be the potential threat towards them or not. So he sees it pretty clearly as it's something that could, like the worst case scenario would be something imminently destructive or negative. And he was the one that proposed back in, I think, 2022, around that time. I mean, I can't remember exactly what podcast it was. He was on so many back in the day when he was on every single podcast. He would say, wait 5 years from now and it'll all come out, or there'll be a lot more answers, something along those lines. And this is something that Rob Hernandez, which, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of, because it seems a lot of what he says, at least in my perspective, is quite speculative. But he sort of tagged onto this idea, and he's recently said that he's been talking to his channelers, people who channel God knows what, I don't know, aliens or entities or both, and spirits. And they seem to confirm this date as well, 2027. So it's quite interesting. I mean, then you have as well, I saw on X the clip of Jeremy Corbell talking about how 2027 is a date that, you know, he's been aware of for quite a long time, but he denies that there will be some sort of giant UFO or some giant disclosure like that. From what I know, he just says that year something seems like people who are deep in the know of this seem to believe that this is a date where something will happen.
Because we don't know where they came from. We don't know where their home base is. We don't know what raw materials they need to function. We don't know if they eat, drink, or sleep. We've got no data on this. How do you defend yourself against an entity that's coming at you from God knows where, God knows when, with God knows what resources?
but no one knows what. It was interesting on the Engaging the Phenomenon episode with Jim Semivan and Peter Levenda. Jim Semivan straight up thought it was baloney, the whole thing. He said, there's no way anyone's going to know anything. Everything of what Lou Elizondo said was speculative, and no one's going to really know a date. And it's quite interesting. His perspective is very, when he talks about the UAP and NHI, his perspective is very, how would I describe it? Like very sort of, very practical and sort of down to earth in the sense that you take a guy like him who's working for the CIA and he has these really profound experiences with his wife as well, with the entities where he said in this episode that left a hole in the back of his neck and supposedly left an implant in his body, and his wife was bleeding for 17 days from a result of this experience. I mean, to have these deep experiences and then have such a sort of black and white, or at least to me, seems like a very practical and I would say wise perspective to have about this. I mean, he's not speculative at all. He's not going on theories and what people say, and he's just saying, these NHI, these UAP seem like they're in total control, and we have no idea to know what they are, what their intentions are either. And even if they did tell us, if they'd told some channelers or some government workers a potential date, it could possibly just be deception.
So I don't think we're sitting on our hands. I think, I don't want to put words in Jim's mouth, but I don't think we're sitting on our hands. I think people are doing what they can to try to figure out what this is, but they're hamstrung. I mean, their hands are tied because we have too much cultural crap to deal with first before we can clear-eyed look at what the implications are of this, right? We're making a lot of assumptions. An American mentality, American military or intelligence mentality is going to be somewhat similar to that of, let's say, the Russians or the Chinese in certain ways. But in certain other ways, they won't be. There's cultural differences with how we approach the phenomenon. As I said, there are, indigenous peoples all around the world who are pretty comfortable with it, right? And don't regard it as an invading force. They regard it as a spiritual force, maybe as something that comes in and out, that maybe there are spirits they have to appease in some way. But they've worked out a plan, and they've worked out a system for dealing with it. And it seems to work for them. We don't have a system for dealing with this because we're thinking really differently just as Americans ourselves. We have this idea that we created this country, we kicked out the British, we kicked out eventually the French, we kicked out everybody, we kicked out the American Indians. We did all of this stuff, and we have our Constitution. We have this. We have a how shall I put it? A kind of movie that goes on in our heads about who we are and what our country is and what the defenses of this country require and all the rest of it. And then you've got the entity, you've got this NHI, you've got whatever the phenomenon is showing up and saying, "Oh yeah, really? Seriously?" And they're questioning every single aspect of who we are. Their mere existence questions every single aspect of who we are. Language, culture, raw material need, water, air, language, everything is being questioned. Politics, non-existent, right? We're looking at a phenomenon that we have no clue if there's a political structure behind them. We don't know if this is just like an ant colony, right? Or like a beehive, a situation that we're looking at. Maybe there's a queen bee somewhere. Maybe all the phenomenon are just individual worker bees. We have no way of knowing it. We have all kinds of, like I just did, we come up with ideas, with similes, with metaphors, and we're trying to figure out, what this is, but we're coming up with stuff based on our own experience of the world. Now we have to come up with something which is based on an experience of another world. And that's what's really freaky. How do we defend ourselves against that?
So there's no real way to know anything. I mean, I'm sure he knows more than anyone. The amount of contactees that have been told narratives that are just complete lies, or at least, in the words of Alex Jones, having a turd in the punch bowl, there'll be some truth and then this big lie that just ruins everything. And it's very hard to make sense of it. But what I do sense is, even from outside the UFO community, I was recently listening to an episode from Making Sense with Sam Harris, and he had on someone who worked in OpenAI, and he was proposing this year, the year 2027 as well, as a year where there'll be a big shift in superintelligence. And it doesn't. He predicts that it won't turn out well for humanity. So it's quite interesting, that connection as well, where people from outside the UFO just also somehow believe that in 2 years something drastic is going to happen. It could be that we've reached this level of technological height that we need to sort of be visited or be made known by the entities in a much clearer and more profound way. Either to let us know that we're not, we're a bit too careless with this technology, and that we may need to come back to our senses, or it could be a threat to them. I don't know. There's so many ideas about this, but it's quite interesting, that correlation between supposedly experts in the AI field predicting 2027 and a lot of government employees and insiders predicting this year as well. So I'm not too sure. I mean, it's a great conversation. I really recommend you guys to listen to the episode with James Landoli, with Peter Levenda and Jim Semivan. It's about 3 hours and it's really great. I mean, they go into the book War and into a lot of things that Tom has said in the past and trying to make sense of it, because Tom DeLonge is not really making any new interviews recently, which I would love if he came back and did a few more interviews. But yeah, I recommend listening to Jim Semivan on this. His perspective seems to make more sense to me. I just don't know how these people on the inside would know that date, even if it is true that they've been told by entities or channelers. How would you know that is true? Like, how would you know you're not being deceived? It's a bit, I don't know. It's a bit confusing for me. But anyways, I'd love to hear what you think about this date and the proposed invasion or forced disclosure, and I hope to hear from you soon.